Now that we've got the green light, let's go ahead and carry on with our agenda. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce probably one of my most favorite colleagues around and one of my most dear friends. That's the one and only Chuck Stanley. As we were putting together this agenda, the one and only. As we were putting together this agenda, we wanted to cover the NRCS, but from a Great Plains perspective. And we tossed around a few names, and I said, really, we need Chuck on this thing if we're going to get anywhere and do any good with it. And so we asked Chuck to handle this NRCS panel discussion and brief update. And of course, he brought his friends, which he is going to introduce all of them to. But if you haven't met Chuck already, grab him after 5 o'clock. That's definitely when he's at his peak time, if you know what I mean. Not only is he a connoisseur of Hawaiian shirts and just, overall down-to-earthness, he's a renowned fire ecologist. He serves as the National Fire Ecologist for the NRCS. But when you talk to him, he will always introduce himself as a range management specialist first and foremost. And that's probably one of the most coolest things about him, too, is he sees all areas of the big picture. He's based in Fort Worth, but he's hardly ever there, I think. I spent more time up here than probably anybody else in Texas has. So let's introduce Chuck, give him a round of applause, and we'll get started with this panel.
Wow, thanks Morgan, and thanks everybody for clapping first, because when I get done, probably won't get an applause, so that's okay. So I appreciate it. It's good to be here. Thank goodness we actually got to travel NRCS right up to the last minute. Don't know if this COVID thing was going to let us be here or not. Good thing was we got to make it, and hopefully we'll get to be doing some more traveling. I do know that they're opening up all the field offices now 100%, so that's a good thing. So, but anyway, let's move on. I am a rangeland specialist out of Fort Worth, Texas. I'm at the Central National Technology Support Center. It used to be the senior center, but now we're starting to get some younger folks in there, and that's a good thing too. But I also co-lateral duty as National Fire Ecologist, and basically what that does is I'm more or less in charge of handling policy, helping the states with their job approval authorities for the NRCS, and also the standard and specifications to some extent. The states always have that. Now, one thing on policy, I'm really bad about it, but policy is not something that's really fun to read. But on the other side of that, outside of engineering practices for the NRCS, prescribed burning is the only practice in the ecological sciences side that has a policy behind it. And there's a good reason for that, because of the inherent perceived risk associated with prescribed fire and the assistance that we can provide our landowners and our customers out in the field. Now, let's go back. I want to paint a picture for you a little bit before we get going. I don't want to take up all these guys' time, because they're the ones that are actually out there on the ground working with the states. When I started with the NRCS, in Oklahoma, we could go out in the field, and I was out every day, and we were doing burns. I was training people left and right, and my job approval authority, I got up to the highest level that Oklahoma had, where I could train people. And at the time, what we considered burn season, I would clear out 3 or 4 field offices to go and do a burn for producer, and hopefully sometimes get a couple of burns done in a day, but it was always training burns because we were getting our employees trained up. Well, that went on pretty good, and then I got my current job there in Fort Worth, and lo and behold, it was about that time, Brett, you correct me a little bit, but 2004, 2005, we started getting an influx of EQIP dollars. And programs has really taken off, and we're trying to get those program dollars, conservation dollars, out on the ground. Well, let me tell you something about prescribed burning. Number one, it's real easy to clear out 3 or 4 field offices because it's, number one, fun, and you're out of the office. But when program dollars are one of the big things we're trying to get out to the producers. The state conservationists in every state, and this is my opinion, but I'm pretty sure it's a good one, is when you clear out 3 or 4 field offices and there's nobody there to accept, take applications for conservation programs, the state con, it only takes one call from a producer before that's going to stop. And I think that had some to do with it, right? But also some of the policy things we had going on. So being in charge of policy, we did a revision in 2019. And it was after we got it out, some of the policy revisions we did was make it easier for the employees to be able to participate on prescribed burns. And we changed up the job approval authorities for our employees to a little bit. It made it somewhat where it wasn't so progressive in nature, but they could go on up to a higher level job approval authority as they were willing to, as the states wanted them to. Now with policy, other than COVID policy that comes from headquarters and everybody's got to follow it, prescribed burn policy, the states still have the authority to make it more stringent than what the national policy is. And that's fine too, and that's how the states, if they want to do that, I'm good with that, and I'm willing to help them along to make sure that the producers get that assistance still that they deserve from NRCS technical people. Now with that said, one of the things in the policy that we did change, and John Weir wanted me to mention this because it was a big thing. Before, NRCS field office employee had to have a job approval authority. For you, whoever wrote the plan, if they brought it in, they had to have the approval authority for that category of burn to be able to approve that plan. We changed that in the policy. Now the states can still do what they need to for their own purposes, but we changed that to where we can accept those plans. In other words, if the 10 or 12 things that are in the standard that said have to be in the burn plan, an employee just has to have a job approval level 1 and that type of training, which is really basic, to accept those plans. So it should make it easier, and there's no bottleneck anymore at the state office with these guys and gals of having to approve plans that the field office may not have that job approval authority. So that's just a little bit of where I've go. We've got these state specialists here that can talk more about what's going on in their states, what's working well. Brett, if you want to say something or you want to ask questions, you can do that too. But we're going to turn it over to these guys. Who wants to jump up first? We got Jeff Nichols from Nebraska, Emily Helms, and Jay Herman from South Dakota, and Dusty Taha from Kansas. Texas and Oklahoma didn't show up, but we can forgive them. It had something to do with that Diskey line. I don't know if they could cross over or not. So, you want to go up? Sure. So Jeff Nichols, and this is an open question and answer. If y'all have questions for these folks, if we try to hear you, we'll run out and get the question or repeat it for them.
Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to be here today and hopefully share a few things with you about some highlights with the prescribed burn practice that Nebraska NRCS deals with. I'm State Range Management Specialist for Nebraska. I've just been in that role a little over a year now. But prior to that, I had the privilege of working here in Lincoln County as a field office employee and got to spend quite a few years working with some of these great burn practitioners around this area and in the Lusk Canyon. So that really has helped me a lot to be able to be around those folks and be able to understand the practice a little better than maybe a lot of people get the opportunity to. So anyway, so I'll just jump into, I've got a few highlights here that I want to share with what we do with Nebraska with respect to prescribed burning. I had them pull a report here a week or so ago to give us our last 5 years of acres that were reported through NRCS programs for prescribed burning in Nebraska. And you can see some pretty variable numbers here in terms of acres, but the thing I want you to be aware of this is certainly not all inclusive of the acres burned in Nebraska. These would just be acres that are reported through USDA programs or through NRCS programs. And so would capture things like EQIP and CRP acres that prescribed burns that were completed and reported. So certainly in Nebraska, there's a lot more acres that get burned than this, but you can see it's been somewhat variable here over the years. So one of the things they wanted us to cover is things that are going well, that are working well in Nebraska in terms of prescribed burn practice. And one of the things that's worked really well for us over the last number of years is that we've been able to utilize the services of technical service providers to do some of the planning for us, especially on these more complex burns. There are 3 of those currently working in Nebraska, a couple of them right here in the Lost Canyons area, southeast of town here, and another one over more in the central portion of the state. But what that really did for us here in our area anyway is it took a lot of that time-consuming workload off of our plate of repeated trips to the field and things like that. And it's worked well because those technical service providers are also involved in the execution of the prescribed burns themselves and things like that too. So they gain an intimate knowledge of those burn units, doing the practice, the burn unit layout, and then constructing the plan, and then also being involved in the execution of that. So that's been a real positive thing for us, and we're thankful that that's been in place. The other thing that's been really big for Nebraska in terms of getting prescribed fire on the ground is the partners that we have here to work with in the state of Nebraska, and certainly for CRP burns, a lot of the burns that have been done on CRP acres, our partners, the Farm Bill biologists, have been huge in that effort, and all the efforts that they've put into building the prescribed burn program here in Nebraska, Pheasants Forever, Game and Parks, and others. Others that are helping now in terms of prescribed burn planning, the Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition has a couple of employees that are providing services to landowners in that regard and helping them conduct prescribed burns, giving them some leadership there. I know there's some natural resource districts that are leaning this way and hiring employees that can help provide prescribed burn planning. Central Platte NRD is one here that I'm aware of that's not far from here that's got some individuals hired that do that. And then Nature Conservancy, they've got some cooperative positions here in Nebraska that are helping to write prescribed burn plans across the state. So Audubon as well, I know down in the southeast part of the state with Spring Creek Prairie down there, their individuals are helping on private lands as well. So it's great to have all these partners working together for a common cause, common goals on this. So as far as NRCS prescribed burn planning, we've got some very experienced planners that have been doing it for a lot of years, and then we've got some others that just don't have maybe the opportunities in their areas to get much experience due to just lack of prescribed burning that's really taken hold in their area, or just maybe don't have job approval authority yet to do some of those planning efforts yet, especially on the more complex burns. But that's something that we see as an opportunity to do some improvement on. NRCS, some of our challenges that we have with respect to increasing prescribed burning in the state, it's a common list that all of us have faced in our different positions. As far as landowners, working with our landowners and their cultural will to be able to do that, it's really strong in some areas of the state where there's some landowner prescribed burn associations already started, but in other areas of the state, the need for prescribed burning is there, but just don't have the landowner buy-in completely yet on the practice. And so some of it is those landowners just recognizing the necessity for the practice and getting it going earlier in the process, but of encroachment, but then other things such as financial impacts for needing to defer grazing, things like that, are obstacle sometimes for landowners. And of course, as brought up yesterday, this whole fear of liability and risk, or perceived anyway, that exists among some landowners. And then, of course, the know-how and equipment, labor, all those things that go into conducting prescribed burns, that oftentimes is not in place with landowners in certain areas. So some of the other challenges or obstacles that we have, as Chuck just mentioned, maybe some of our agency policies and guidelines have led us to being able to have some limited capacity in certain areas. And then just the nature of our agency and program workload and all those things. All our planners in our various field offices, they have a lot on their plate. And for them to have the time to do a good job and a quality job of planning with landowners on prescribed burning sometimes just isn't always available to them. So having these other things like our partners and TSPs and other things to fall back on has been really great. So some of the opportunities that we're looking forward to improve on as we move forward with our prescribed burning program here in Nebraska from an NRCS standpoint is to increase the amount of training that we make available to our employees. We've recently, just within the last 2 years, had roughly 80 new employees hired in the state of Nebraska, young folks that have come on for different positions around the state. And with this influx of new employees, it's a great opportunity to expose them to prescribed fire as a practice and get them trained up and be effective planners and deliverers of technical assistance to our landowners. So training is going to be a priority for us. Partners, working with our partners, obviously, you know, we wouldn't be able to do anything with prescribed fire on our own if it wasn't for the partners that are all involved in this. And so many of you in the room are involved in that. We're appreciative of the partnerships that exist. And ability to share resources. I know they just had a prescribed burn training, a growing season burn training down in Kansas here in the last couple weeks that Chuck and John were involved in, and we were able to send a couple of Nebraska people down there. And we're looking to put together a training that's similar for next spring here, a week-long training in Nebraska, and we intend to reciprocate and be able to bring a few individuals from outside Nebraska in to participate in that if the desire is there. So one thing I'll mention is we're trying to expand the capacity again by hiring a state prescribed burn specialist. And this position would be a state office position under the ecological sciences staff with Britt Weiser being the supervisor. We have advertised that once and we had some good applications. I thought we had an individual hired for that position, but just a few details didn't work out personally for them with their current position and so forth. And so ended up turning down the job there at the last. And so we're positioned where we're going to re-advertise that position here in the near future, and it's going to be opened up. First time it was advertised, it was just government-wide, and now it will be opened up to the public, to everybody. So those of you, lots of good fire practitioners in here that are looking for a job where you can do some training with individuals and help work with landowners on developing prescribed burn associations and things like that. If that's your interest in your gig, keep an eye open for this job announcement. I think there's 3 or 4 different locations that are potential around the state where this could be located. So so keep an eye open for that, and that's something that is coming in the near future. One other thing, last year in Nebraska, NRCS started here with the Great Plains Grassland Initiative. We designated 4 areas that are focal areas across the state where we're trying to increase this awareness of the woody encroachment issue, and certainly prescribed burning as a practice that is going to be useful in that whole effort, and try to promote through our programs. Another thing that's just taken shape here just this year in 2022 is we've created this NRCS Great Plains Grassland Initiative Cadre, and that's where the supervisors within each of those 4 focal areas appointed 18 individuals that will be spending a higher amount of time and dedicated effort towards the woody encroachment issue. And it's really important that we work in cooperation and in concert with our partners in that effort. And so certainly with that, they're going to be trained up and in the knowledge of prescribed fire, and many of those individuals are here today and yesterday, and we're just glad that this opportunity was here as a training opportunity, and for them to network with other fire practitioners to learn and begin to build some of their capacity there. Okay, as far as landowner opportunities, we want to build an earlier awareness, of course, of alternatives available, earlier awareness of the problem of the woody encroachment, but also ability to use prescribed fire earlier in the process before the trees get transitioned completely over into a woody landscape. Want to work on developing, one of the things that's always a common thing is that landowners have a hard time finding alternative forage resources while they're building fine fuels for prescribed fire. So we want to look at building some incentives for alternative forage sources. And then ultimately we want our new people that we're trying to get trained up at these various training opportunities to be able to help assist with prescribed burning unit layout and prep work that needs to be done up front. And then, of course, we've got some financial assistance that's been allocated through this EQIP through the Great Plains Grassland Initiative. So I probably have taken up more than my allocation of time, but I want to open it up then for the rest of them to be able to.
Please, Matt. We'll do the questions and answers after everybody goes here. So next, looks like Dusty's going to give us his view of the world from Kansas.
Hi, I'm Dusty Taha. I'm not a state range person. I'm an area range management specialist out of South Central and Southwestern Kansas. I'm kind of our in-house fire freak. You know, Doug Spencer is our state range specialist. He is currently teaching an adult range school in western Kansas right now, so we decided to divide and conquer this week. You know, fire from the NRCS perspective in Kansas, and I do apologize, I do not have a fancy PowerPoint, so I'll be sharing with you my chicken scratches here. So, the NRCS perspective on fire and prescribed burning in Kansas has always been a strong one, and has grown much more so in the last 4 or 5 years. You know, we've always promoted prescribed fire. We've always provided prescribed burn plans or provided partnership planning, funding to get prescribed burn plans on the land and working with producers. But a lot of what we did kind of reflected what was shared with you by John Weir and Dirac yesterday. You know, it was a lot of brush management, a lot of grazing plans, fence, water development, and I'm not saying that all that's not important when it comes to a cohesive range management plan, but fire was just another one of those, equal practices in there, kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't sort of thing. And we've certainly seen the repercussions of that, even in my relatively short career. I'm about halfway through. Where I find myself back at a tract of land and I roll up to the gate, probably a different name on the application, who knows. But I look around, man, I've been here before. I recognize this place, and it was something that we had in EQIP, 10 or 12 years ago. And it was cut, maybe they burned it, maybe they didn't. If they did burn it, they probably burned it once, and we're right back in the same fix, spending all the money and time and effort again, taxpayer-wise, my time, the producer's time and money. And the emphasis just wasn't put on fire the way it needed to be, recognizing that kind of expenditure in planning into brush management alone was not curbing the problem, and that fire was the biggest missing link. And we always knew that, but in the world of programs and the way they function, their relatively short time span and all that, we just weren't getting the point across. And so we've put a much larger emphasis on fire in the last 4 or 5 years with the full-on recognition that doing all this other stuff without prescribed burning was frankly a pure waste of time and money. And so that's kind of where we're at now. You know, NRCS in Kansas, we promote fire. We'll include prescribed burning in conservation plans. Some of them are just conservation plans. Some of them roll into some kind of a farm bill contract. We'll provide prescribed burn plans in-house. We also have a number of people. We provide some funding to Kansas Prescribed Fire Council for some side contractors. That's all they do is roam around and write prescribed burn plans. Jess Crockford's here with me up here this week, and he's been very instrumental down in the area I work in getting that done with hundreds of prescribed burn plans, and it's been very, very successful. And kind of like Chuck hit on, I mean, we will go out and participate in fires, and that's always been something that Kansas has been allowed to do. Up until the recent 2019 national policy change, it was something that we would go do, and you could be there, you could observe, you could help with monitoring, suppression, mop up, that sort of thing. You could do everything up to, but not including helping any advance of the fire, so no ignition. With the recent change in policy, we've now reassessed our state supplement to national policy. That's that segment of state policy where a state can be somewhat more restrictive than the national policy. So we've tweaked it a little bit, but by and large, our state supplement, which is currently, I think, waiting to circle back to us for approval, but I think it's a pretty well done deal. Mostly just purely reflects the national policy. We didn't put many more sideboards on it than what the national policy has. And so that's been a big relief that your hands aren't tied near as much as they used to be about participating in burns. Because like all practices, and burning probably even more so, it always kind of irks a person if you have somebody in a field office that's recommending a practice, and is promoting a practice, trying to get a landowner who's probably maybe a little bit iffy, particularly in the case of fire, about doing that practice, and this field office person really has never had any hands-on with that practice themselves. And so the only way to really figure out fire, and most of you in here in this room that are fire practitioners and know this, the only way to really learn about it and know it best is to go do it yourself. And so that's what we're trying to get to. It was mentioned, yeah, two weeks ago, we did have a in-house week-long live fire burn training where we had 26 of our own people, most of them NRCS, a few PF people from across our state that are PF NRCS partners under a contract, and then 2 folks from Nebraska, and we spent 3 days out burning stuff, and so that was good, and we hope to continue that within our state. That's kind of a general summary of where we're at and how we promote fire in Kansas. I mean, we're pushing it, and we're pushing it hard. We have a whole host of partners that we work with to get this done. Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition, Kansas Prescribed Fire Council, Kansas Prescribed Burn Association, which in Kansas is kind of the mother group, and then local PBAs operate within and under the state group's 501c3. So there's only one 501c3, and all the local groups you could kind of think of them as local chapters. So we lean on them heavily, and that's been a huge advantage to have PBAs in our state. Most of the PBAs in our state are, if you're familiar with Kansas, the Highway 81 / Interstate 135 runs north and south, Salino down to Wichita, up to Concordia, kind of right through the middle of the state. PBAs are very functional west of that line. You get east of that line, while there are now a few PBAs in the eastern half of the state, east of that line, you're in kind of the Flint Hills burn culture. And these are people that get together. They cooperate to get fire on the ground. They put a lot of fire on the ground, but they don't do it under the formal structure of a PBA. So PBAs have been huge. Pheasants Forever, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, Nature Conservancy, Kansas Forest Service, local fire departments. We've worked on and off and continue to work with KDHE, which they have 2 folks here. Gina's here with EPA. We've worked extensively with them over the last decade and a half on smoke management. That mostly has to do with the large concentration of smoke that goes up in early April out of the Flint Hills, with all the annual spring burning that goes on there, and how to mitigate and deal with that with the general public. And that's been a hurdle, but it's been good to have them on board. You know, they come to stuff like this. They have a huge willingness to learn about the need to burn, and they've been excellent partners in that. So, you know, we have a far-reaching network of partners in all aspects of this. And most recently, this has really even branched out into, and it's nice to see the presentation earlier of kind of fighting fire with fire sort of thing, but with fire mitigation, wildfire mitigation. So we have a few areas in the state that are high threat wildland urban interface areas. You know, so I think a lot of folks in the central part of the country, you know, we see the stuff on the news every year. It comes out of California, and like, well, those idiots, you know, why would you do that? And you know, we can turn in a lot of cases and look right in our own backyard and see the same thing. We have the same problem now. And I think this new wildfire situation that we deal with in the Great Plains, it's not, a lot of people that I work with in emergency management departments, county commissions, local fire departments, there when all this started kind of back 15, 16, 17, we started to have large wildfires. I mean, several 100,000 acres at a shot. And you know, like, oh, this is just an anomaly, this too shall pass, you know, and I think the realization is starting to come around that this is the new norm. And, you know, we can look at all different things, you know, climate, fuel loading, a lot of it's just woody growth and expansion. That's what's driving a lot of it, but at least in our state. So we're now dipped into fire mitigation. We have a state governor's task force that's been appointed. NRCS has a chair at that. We work with local county commissions on their burn resolutions to make sure that the resolution's amenable to PBAs or general landowners getting prescribed burns done. Kind of that whole reaching out to educate for the greater good of getting fire on the ground. So yeah, I think that kind of covers, another topic here was key elements of NRCS prescribed fire that work well. And the collaboration with the partners has probably been the biggest thing. And honestly, PBAs probably top that list. Prescribed burn associations have been huge. In our state, you know, if you're in Chase County in the middle of the Flint Hills and you're the person that doesn't burn, your neighbors are probably going to terrorize you, and they might drive you right out of the country. You know, that's how much of a burn culture there is there. If you go a couple 100 miles west into you know, Ness or Gove or Logan County, right in the heart of the western quarter of the state, and you're the one person that does burn, they might terrorize you and drive you out of the country. So it's that reciprocation of the culture that goes on there. And so PBAs, as we encourage the westward expansion of fire culture to try to keep up with the westward expansion of woody encroachment, PBAs have been a huge leg up in getting that done. And then GPGI, which is it is a farm bill program. It's kind of, you know, tucked in there under EQIP. And similar to Nebraska, we've launched that. We're now in our second fiscal year. Actually, second fiscal year contracts are now on the ground and running. Eva shared yesterday during her talk on Kansas Prescribed Burn Association updates that we've got about 170,000 some odd acres that are kind of tucked in under that GPGI thought process. I won't say that we have that many acres actually under contract, but that's kind of the acres that are moving towards that whole thought process of seed dispersal, understanding the core concept, you know, identify the core, protect the core, grow the core, to push back the seed source. And so we've got that going on across the state. Central and eastern part of the states, we have 3 priority areas, the Flint Hills. Everybody's familiar with where the Flint Hills is at in Kansas, I think. And then we've got the Smoky Hills, which is that area of north central Kansas, around Salina and northwest of Salina. And then we've got the Red Hills, or also called the Gypsum Hills, Medicine Lodge over to Ashland, and then that Red Hills ecoregion extends south across the state line into Oklahoma. And so we're up and running with that. We have conservation delivery specialists, one of which, Mike Coleman, is with us here at the meeting. And those are, that's a partnership agreement with Pheasants Forever to better assist us at getting that conservation on the ground. So we have those people out roaming around, literally beating on doors and spreading the gospel about trees, prescribed burning, seed dispersal, and the need to get moving and do something about it. Most of the priority areas in the state now have, I call them kind of our local pro-fire tree hater club. And what that is NRCS, our prescribed fire council people, our PF people, KDWP, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, TNC, Kansas Forest Service. We kind of gather every now and then, and we basically are scheming and devising against the trees. So we're like, well, we've got this here. We need to get this guy here to move because he's the hurdle at expanding this core. He's the internal seed source now. So who's going to go knock on his door? And so we're collaborating to get this done. So I feel good about that, where that's going. One other thing to hit on was kind of challenges and limitations we face, and I kind of started into one of these, but that developing the fire culture in the western half of our state, because what we find is that, like a lot of things, humans, we tend to be reactive rather than proactive, and so if the woody encroachment reaches you and your area is anti-fire, worst case scenario, or at least not pro-fire, there's no fire culture, you're way behind the 8 ball already. And so the need to get that fire culture out in front of the woody encroachment, to get people comfortable with burning and used to burning and have knowledge and the skills to actually conduct safe burns before the woody encroachment gets there, because I think if we can do that, we can stop the woody advance dead in its tracks. But if we're always chasing the tree, it's an uphill battle at that point. So that's definitely a challenge that we face. Identifying and motivating early adopters. So, and these oftentimes end up being people that I'm willing to be the, what they're going to be talking about at the coffee shop the next 2 months. That crazy guy that burned when we all knew it was a bad idea. Identifying that person, that person will often end up being your ramrod of a PBA if you can get one off the ground. But identifying those people and reaching out to them and getting going. And just flat out getting enough fire on the ground. So, in Kansas, traditional burn seasons, March and April. And as we all know, and John exhibited yesterday, March and April, if you had to pick the 2 worst months for conditions for safe prescribed burning in the year, that would probably be it, particularly March. And we oftentimes see that out of those 2 months, you might get, depending on the year, somewhere between 10 and 15 burnable days. And you just simply cannot get the amount of fire on the ground that we need to do. And we've been shown that through several presentations already too. And so the only way to expand this is to branch out from the non-traditional burn season, right? And that gets in the growing season burn. And in these big ranch areas where it's most of them are cow-calf operations, the biggest hurdle that we see in getting more fire on the ground is getting the people to expand out into the growing season. It's not that they oh, that won't burn, it's too green, or it's too late in the year. No. The reason why the hurdle that we face is grazing around that fuel load planning. That's the greatest hurdle we've come across, and so we've attempted to incentivize that with some government programs, and we've had some success. So basically, we pay a deferment payment, and that's within GPGI, and we'll probably start doing that also within general EQIP on grazing land health applications. That the deferment payment basically takes into account foregone income from laying off to build that fuel load, to hold that fuel load into July, August, and September for that non-traditional burn season to get off the ground so we can get more acres burned. So we're working on that, and then internally, like a lot of places, we face staffing problems. Okay. So staffing and training has been a problem. So we're getting staff back up, but there again, if you got a whole bunch of new employees that don't know anything, just having a warm body in the office doesn't do you a lot of good until you get them trained. So, all right.
Thanks, Dusty. Y'all go find Dusty after this and get the rest of the story. Now we got Emily and Jay come up from South Dakota. We may not have much time for Q&A afterwards, but I think we'll all be around to do that if you have any.
Okay, so I don't think we'll be as long-winded. We're not big talkers here, but so I'm Emily Helms. I'm the State Range Management Specialist for South Dakota NRCS.
Jay Herman, I'm an Area Range Management Specialist in South Dakota.
I'll let you go.
Okay. We just got a few notes here that we're going to go through quick, and I'm going to talk about what's working well in South Dakota. And the biggest thing that's really working well in South Dakota is our partnerships. And without SDSU, Pete Bauman and Sean Kelly and Sandy Smart, we would be struggling. I have to say that. And then the Nature Conservancy is a big partnership that we have, the Audubon Society, the Mid-Missouri Group, our burn association that we have in South Dakota. They're really pushing forward. And then our game fishing parks, they're really helping out a lot. We're fortunate that we had our last state conservationist was supportive of burning, so that really helped us trying to get our efforts going. And our state resource conservationist is both really in support of getting burning going in South Dakota. And so we're staffing up, we're getting staff with experience now. We're doing trainings just about every year. We do about 2 or 3 trainings a year. SDSU is a big part of that to get that going. I don't know if Pyro Pete's in the room here, but if you guys know Pete Bauman, we call him Pyro Pete. He helps us get all that going for us. So yeah, it's really coming along. We're working well with our partners, and we want to continue that relationship with them and build upon it.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the rest?
Sure. Okay, so for challenges that we face, like across the state, we need more manpower, just like everybody else. I think just need to build up our prescribed burn associations across the state. There's a few areas that I think there's some cultural will. We just have to try to get them organized, and SDSU is going to help with that quite a bit. We also kind of have this lack of understanding of fire and how it's needed on the landscape. I think a lot of people still believe that it never happened, so we have to do a lot of education. We don't have enough equipment, and we also don't really have any TSPs like they do in Nebraska or Kansas, so we're working on building that in South Dakota as well. The TSP process is kind of a bear, so that's what is hard. And then to build capacity, some of the awesome things that are happening. One of our assistant state conservationists for programs, she's gung-ho about burning and grassland restoration and all that. So she's working with another one of our partners, Cattlemen's, to create some grassland curriculum, like grassland education curriculum. So I think that's going to really help build knowledge of fire in our ecosystem and how important it is. So I'm really excited about that. It's just going to be a lot of work. So if you guys have ideas, let me know. And then we're working towards doing more hands-on training across the state. So far we've done, like Jay said, training. Last year we got to burn in Mitchell and up by Brookings, and so we're hoping to do more of those and get more people with live fire, because that's where you learn a lot. And GPGI, which they've talked about too, we haven't started that yet. I think that'll be a fiscal year 2023 project, and we're looking to forge new partnerships wherever they may be. So, thanks.
Okay, we have little bit of time for questions until Brian comes back. 2 minutes? So, anybody? John Weir's writing down a question. Well, then y'all explain. Okay, good.
I'll ask one. So I don't know if it varies by state or not. I work in Texas, and it seems like when working with some of our NRCS offices, fire is one of those things, whether it be for contract modifications, because we never know what the weather's gonna do, versus fire breaks is something that can be put in more easily. It seems like fire breaks are more accepted to get funded than fire itself. Have y'all run across that, or do y'all experience that in y'all states? As far as just paying producers for fire, or is it more accepted to do just paying for fire breaks?
But in Kansas, we'll outright pay them an incentive payment for 338 prescribed burning. Only recently did we even start cost sharing on fire breaks. And so what we'll do is, because of the weather, we will we'll oftentimes have to kick the can in a contract and modify it. And I know that contract administrative people don't like to see a lot of that, but it's just the reality. If you can't burn, you can't burn because of the weather. And so we'll just delay the practice a year, but we'll keep it in there. Now, prior to 4 or 5 years ago, oftentimes a contract would go on, and then we just mod it and delete it out and let the contract die a death. And those were the contracts that we were revisiting in 10 years. So I'm hopeful that we're no longer going to do that. Time will tell to see where push comes to shove on contracts.
We ran into a little bit of that issue earlier on, where we were doing a lot of modifications just because maybe they contracted to do some prescribed burning but didn't really have the wherewithal or the know-how or whatever to get the practice carried out. But we kind of got past that stage after a while once we started getting more of the prescribed burn associations up and going, and that's kind of where the burn's concentrated on, and then some other areas, where there isn't that. They're just, it's a practice where it's not, you can't find a contractor around every corner to come do it for you, so it's really relying on the prescribed burn associations and partners and things like that to help facilitate some of that. But those wrinkles kind of work their way out over the years as the practices gain momentum for us. But for the most part, we don't have a lot of mods unless it's for weather-related stuff. They're not being able to carry it out because of drought or something like that. So.
Cool. Anybody else? Thank you, Brian. Ready to get up here? Morgan, do you have anything?
Thank you, panelists.
Yep. Thank you, panel. Appreciate you taking the time. Thank all of you.